This is Common Knowledge, a Magic the Gathering podcast about improving at the game with a focus on pauper play. It's not about the cost, it's about the knowledge. Welcome to Common Knowledge. Here are your hosts, Brandon Clark and Lobbert. Enjoy this week's episode of Common Knowledge.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 16 of the Common Knowledge podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Clark, and joined with me on the other side of internet land is the majestic, wild Sean.
I'm really just on, like, the other side of town.
You're actually kind of far away from me.
It's like 15 minutes.
Yeah, I guess in terms of, like, Utah, though, that's kind of far away.
Yeah.
Everything is very close here, so when someone's, like, 15 minutes away, it's like, oh, he lives all the way in Ogden.
If this was Britain, that would be the other side of the country.
British people. Oh, man. Holy cow. What are we doing? Are we recording a podcast?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay. Well, let's do that. We have a sponsor for this podcast, puremtgo.com. Check them out for awesome articles, podcasts, and other magic-related stuff. I want to give a shout-out to all our patrons. Thank you so much for supporting the show. And if you listeners would also like to do the same, you can do so at patreon.com/common-knowledge. And don't forget, while you're doing all this, to check out our other sister podcast, the rest of the Constructed Criticism Network. So the Constructed Criticism podcast, the Limited Time Only podcast, both hosted by Spencer Howland. There's some awesome stuff. They're good content, right? They're good. They're great.
Yes.
You become a good Magic player because you listen.
And as far as the Patreon goes, we were talking about, we do play some games after the show, and we were going to record those and put them up for the patrons to see. So,
our patrons from Patreon. Yeah, you can watch me misclick away games that I should win.
Oh, that was beautiful.
That made me so mad. You made me mad that you didn't just concede. Like, oh, you won.
I don't do that.
You just laughed at me and kept playing. You targeted your creature with your fling and then you sacrificed it.
Well,
stupid Magic Online.
I like to think that, yeah, Magic Online is a tool that you have to learn how to use, and
I agree.
I don't concede games to that because I've taken the time to learn all these little things, and if you haven't, I'm not just going to be like, well, here you go.
Yeah. No, I think that's actually the right
thing. I mean, it was just a for fun game, and I kind of wanted to just go to game 3, so haha.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. Like, when I play Magic Online, if my opponent is gonna kill me, I make Magic Online take us to the next game. I don't concede unless it's game 3 and I'm like, then I'll concede, to save a few minutes. But like, if it's game 1 or 2, I'm like, I'm going to make you use all your clock. Yeah. And I know some people think that's shady, like making your opponents run the clock. But like you said, the timer is like a real thing. That is a part of the game when you play Magic Online. And I make good use of my timer. Like I very, very rarely run out of time on my timer. And if my opponents are, that's not my fault that they're taking longer to perform game actions that I'm doing in half the time.
Yeah, like I was playing against Heroic this week in a league, and the guy just had this massive dude just pumped up. It was gonna kill me. I was at like 7 or something, and their guy was like a 14 power creature, and he gives this guy protection from one color. I had 2 colors of creatures. Gives this guy protection from one color, gives this guy protection again, and I'm like, oh, well, I'm dead. I'm going to make him do it. He gave it protection from the same color again, and I just went ahead and blocked. No, it was just...
Wait, what do you mean?
So I had 2 colors of creatures, and he needed...
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, he needed to give it protection from both, so it was unblockable. So I just went ahead and chumped. That felt pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, like, just letting your opponent play it out, you'll make a mistake. And sometimes maybe they don't even see that they have you dead on board.
They hit F5 one too many times past their
I know that
combat.
I missed it. I've definitely had someone concede to me, and I had to stop and like go, what just happened? And then like look and go, oh my gosh, I had lethal. I didn't even realize. Make your opponents play it out.
Yeah,
Maybe
if it's not a scumbag move, like if you're playing with friends, sure, but like if you're playing for ante, like there's something involved.
We don't play for ante. Those cards are banned.
Yeah, but playing for ticks, whatever you want to call it, play points,
treasure chest.
Yeah, it's all. They don't grow on trees, man.
So, I open all my treasure chests.
Ew.
Yeah, what else am I gonna do with them?
Sell them to a bot?
Yeah, or I could open a masterpiece.
Okay.
I opened a masterpiece engineered explosives.
Oh.
I don't know if it's worth a lot of money on Magic Online, but I know I needed an engineered explosives. So I 4-1'd my Pauper League and got some treasure chests and just cracked them all open immediately. And
there are money cards in there, but I think I've cracked like one and I got like an Ugin or something that's worth like 40 cents.
Yeah, Ugin's not worth a lot of money online. I was excited when I got my Ugin out of a treasure chest until I realized it wasn't worth anything. No, it's definitely correct to just not crack your treasure chests open. Like, sell them to a bot for the 2.5 tickets or whatever they're worth. Yeah. I'm just degenerate and like opening things. I open packs for no value for fun. I bought 4 Dragon's Maze packs at an LGS because they had a sale, 4 for $10. And I went, that's a good deal.
No, it's not.
You're right, it's not. But it was fun to open them.
Yeah, there's value in that, but I don't have fun opening the packs.
I did get value out of the pack. I opened the second most expensive card in the set. Voice of Resurgence token.
Is number 1 Voice of Resurgence?
Yeah, and number 2 is his token. Dragon's Maze is a garbage set.
Yeah. Are we ready to move on to what are we playing?
I think so. You don't want to just talk about Magic Online all day?
Yeah.
Yeah, alright, fine. What are you playing, Sean?
Everything. So, I've had this problem this week where, I don't know, nothing is holding my interest. Like, not just with Magic, like, with anything. I just have this weird, like, ADD week where I just jump from thing to thing and I put, like, an hour into one thing and I'm like, alright, I'm bored. And that's also happening with Magic. Like, I've probably played 20 different decks in the past week. And, like, it makes it really hard to brew because I can't just sit down and be like, okay, I've consistently had these problems. Like, I'll play a game, switch up a card, switch decks, play a game, switch up a card. And so I feel like all of my decks are kind of getting just off of where they need to be.
Cool story, bro.
What are you playing?
I played a league with Scred Delver.
Surprising.
Yeah. And then I also played a friendly league with Boros Monarch, and it was my first time ever playing it.
How'd that go?
3-2. It's a really good deck.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of just like carried itself to victory for me.
You find it hard to sideboard?
I had no idea what I was doing ever.
That sounds about right.
So I'll just kind of go down my sideboard really quick. I have 2 copies of Lone Missionary, 2 Standard Bearers, 2 Electrickery, 1 Gorilla Shaman because that's all I could afford at the time. 2 Krark Clan Shamans, 4 Pyroblasts, and 2 Flaring Pain. So the Pyroblasts were obvious, and the Gorilla Shaman is obvious, and the Krark Clan Shamans also were pretty good against the Blue Delver deck and the Blue-Red Delver deck. I don't know. I felt like my biggest issue with my sideboard was that when I was playing against Blue-Red Delver or Blue Delver, I was over sideboarding. Is Card Clan Shaman what I think it does?
No.
Yeah, creature. Oh, without flying. Whoops.
Yeah.
Yeah, never mind. This is for other matchups. Electrickery is what I would bring in against the blue-red and the other decks. So,
yeah, Shaman's like for elves.
Yeah. I got it mixed up. This is without flying, and Electrickery is just every creature. But so I did kind of find though that I was over sideboarding a little bit, or felt like I was over sideboarding, just because I have 4 Pyroblasts, 2 Electrickeries, and I brought in the Standard Bearers, and I don't know if that was correct, just because of all their spot removal. So
I don't think that's correct.
Yeah.
It's basically like take out your 3-bit inspectors and put in your removal and your Pyroblasts and stuff.
Really? You take out the Thraben Inspector?
Yeah, they just get flown over, and that's pretty much all they do.
See, I liked the Thraben Inspector just because it replaced itself. And so I felt like when the games go kind of long, it was nice to like draw a Thraben Inspector and have a redraw, I guess. But I guess that makes sense. It was nothing. It was very low impact, yeah. Like it doesn't block any of their creatures.
Yeah, as a cantrip, it's like a 3-mana cantrip, and then where you at, you've got a 1/2 that's not doing much. And you spent a lot of mana.
Okay, yeah, I get that. Poured out Thraben Inspectors, bring in your Pyroblasts. The Flaring Pain was also a weird one, just because I didn't know. I guess the biggest question is I didn't know if to board it in the mirror match.
Oh.
Like, I didn't know how relevant Prismatic Strands was in the mirror match. Like, I knew if I played against Marasatron, I'm bringing in Flaring Pain to turn off their Moments piece. But I didn't know how relevant Prismatic Strands was in the mirror match. If it was something where it was, like, coming down to a race and where Prismatic Strands was going to be really relevant.
Yeah, I think if you did, it would be mostly to, like, blank burn spells.
Use Prismatic Strand to blank burn spells.
Yeah, and so like your
Flaring Pain would protect your lightning bolt. So you're like turning your lightning bolt into a 3-mana spell.
Or 4 mana, but yeah.
Why? No, Flaring Pain.
Oh yeah, Flaring Pain. Yeah, I was thinking Prismatic Strands. Too many cards.
Yeah. I don't know. That didn't seem great, so I just didn't bring them in at all.
Yeah, that seems right.
Yeah, in the mirror, I think all I brought in was... I think I just brought in the Gorilla Shaman.
I like that.
I think that was the only thing I boarded in out of what my sideboard is, but... Yeah, I don't know. This deck, it's really good, but I think it's hard to play very optimally. Or at least it was for me. I felt like there were a lot of lines.
Huh.
And I found myself on a lot of turns faced with a lot of decisions and not knowing, just based on lack of experience with the deck, what the optimal play was.
I find it to be pretty simple, but maybe let's just remove the things, play the birds, right? But maybe that's way oversimplified. That's obviously way oversimplifying it.
But I don't know. I don't know. I can't think of any like scenarios. I just feel like I remembered like just, I don't know. Every turn just felt like every decision was very important to like how I put my spells and to like when I held up Prismatic Strands or when I didn't or whatever.
Yeah, that would just come with experience.
Yeah, and I think it's probably more intuitive to people who have played more than 5 matches with the deck.
Yeah, you didn't learn anything from the last week's What Are We Playing, where we both failed our leagues where we didn't practice.
Yeah. All right, so that's what we played and what we were playing and what has been played by us. We played it already. And next week we'll play something else and tell you about it. But now we have a super special awesome card of the week to talk to you about because it's the card of the week segment, Sean. Take it away.
So for this week's card of the week, we have Relic of Progenitus. I'm sure you're familiar with Relic of Progenitus, but I'm going to run through it real quick. It is
What is
a
that?
it is a 1-mana artifact that you can tap, and target player exiles a card from their graveyard of their choosing. And it also has 1 mana, exile it, and exile all cards in all graveyards. So it is important to note that the abilities aren't exclusive. If you activate it for the tap ability, you can still pay the 1 and exile all the cards in your graveyard. And the reason I chose this as the card of the week is because it drives me nuts when people don't play this card right. I am a firm believer that as soon as you have priority and there's a card in the graveyard, almost always just activate it. They're not going to choose a different card. If they choose a different card, then the one they're choosing is better. Like, you want them to have as little information as possible. You don't know when, like, a lot of the time you can prevent, like, a Garmog Angler from coming out, or if you wait until their turn and they just put Evolving Wilds on the field, now you can't get that card in their graveyard because they can just pop Evolving Wilds at instant speed. So, like, I just say, pretty much on my upkeep, a lot of the times I will just activate Relic. I can still activate the second ability. Do you have any ideas on this?
Yeah, so the first time I really noticed that that's someone do that was when you did it to me a little while ago. And up to that point, like, I've actually, honestly, I don't know that I very rarely have played decks with Relic of Progenitus in them. And so it's just something I never thought about. Like, when was the best time to activate my Relic? And you did it, and I was kind of like, why didn't you wait to do it? Why did you do that in your main phase? And you kind of explained to me what you just explained now, and I was like, that makes sense. I don't know that I was, like, fully on board at the time. I was just kind of like, okay, that makes sense. I believe you. I don't cast this spell very often. I don't play with it very often, so you could just be right. And I started to pay attention, though, to other players, and all of the best players that I've watched, when they use Relic, that's how they use it. They cast their Relic, and then they Relic right away. And then they untap, and they Relic.
Yeah, it's just, you're going to do something on your turn, whether that's attacking or casting a spell, even doing nothing, that's information. And I know that a lot of the time, what's the word? Instant-itis is when you cast a spell at instant speed when you don't need to. Like, you're losing value by casting it later because you can. And I think Relic is one of those, like, it's one of the biggest offenders. And it's been happening enough, and I've watched enough videos with it that I wanted to just put it out there. Everyone should know this. Just activate Relic early. The only times when you shouldn't are really few and far between, and
I honestly can't even
I'm trying to construct a scenario in my head where you wouldn't want to, and I'm jumping through I'm doing mental gymnastics to try to, and I'm failing.
I don't think that I don't know that there is a real reason to wait. I think every time you wait, you lose equity, right? You give your opponent more information to go off of, and you give them more time to put other spells in their graveyard.
Yeah, like, I've been like, oh, why, maybe I don't need to do it right now, and then I activate it on their turn, and they've untapped, and they're just like, okay, instant speed, I'm gonna cycle this Ash Barrens, and I'm like, ugh. Now I just exile this Ash Barrens, and it became relevant. Like, I've been bitten by it enough times that I'm just saying, just activate it as soon as you can. Okay, here's a scenario. If you need that mana to cast Metallic Rebuke, and you need that untapped artifact, maybe then. But that's a judgment call that should be made at that time, but until then, just do it immediately. Another cool thing about Relic is that it eats up a lot of that match clock. Because someone will just like F6 and wait until their turn, and you activate your Relic and point it at them, and they're like, whoa, why do I have priority? Like, what's going on here? And they have to click a card in their graveyard. So I found that just like activating relics constantly will just eat up a huge amount of their match clock. That's another reason not to activate it at their end step, is because then you gotta F5 a lot more carefully. So that's my PSA.
Right on.
We didn't even talk about when to activate the other ability. I almost always wait until they try to go for something in their graveyard. Like, I don't usually exile it to get rid of like flashback spells unless I like lose to that flashback spell.
Right. Well, you relic with a purpose.
Yeah, like I wait for the ghostly flicker.
Yeah, if that purpose is to beat ghostly flicker, or that purpose is to keep them from casting Gurmag Angler, or you died to the flashback Forbidden Alchemy, it's going to vary by situation, right? Mm-hmm. And it just is kind of a judgment call of what kills me. And if it's the answer is Gurmag Angler, well, just pop the relic in there, in their upkeep or something. Or if it's Ghostly Flicker, wait for them to cast Ghostly Flicker and then relic, or I think
Tron usually is the Ghostly Flicker matchup that I'm thinking of. And I let them do the Ghostly Flicker, and then I actually let them target it with their next Mnemonic Wall before I exile it.
Right, because then they don't have the opportunity to try to cast something else after the relic has resolved that they can get back, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So then the Ghostly Flicker is still in the graveyard, it's gone. They don't get that back either.
But it's a very, very powerful card. I think I run it in almost all of my brews, even ones that use the graveyard, because I just find it to be indispensable. Like, the amount of advantage that this little 1-mana artifact can get you is huge.
Well, should we move into our main topic for the day?
Yes.
Yes, Queen. So this is one that I don't know that I'm excited about, but I'm not. I don't know. Maybe not excited is not the right way to describe how I feel.
I'm dreading it.
We're going to be talking about cantrips today. And both of us tried to do a lot of research for this because this is one of those really heavy-duty topics that if you can do it well, it really takes your game to the next level. And I think it's something that I know I struggle with playing cantrips, like cantrip decks, and I know Sean just like doesn't play cantrip decks, period. Uh-huh. So we're going to try to do our best to give you listeners a solid understanding of the role that cantrips play in your deck, in deck building, in gameplay, and hopefully we don't just sound like a bunch of bumbling morons.
Yeah, there's just so much information here, and there's so much nuance to it, and it's just so dependent on like what you do with the cantrip based on the situation that it's hard to make like general rules about.
General rules.
Aye.
Anyway, for funsies, let's talk about the origin of the term cantrip. I think this is just kind of a fun little tidbit. It doesn't do anything to make you better at Magic cards, but I think it's fun to know. So the term cantrip was taken from Dungeons & Dragons, which is also a Wizards of the Coast product game thing. And a cantrip refers to, is it specifically a zero cost spell?
Well, what
D&D? How does D&D work?
In D&D you have a certain number of spell slots that you can use a day. Mm-hmm. And like you'll have level 1 spells and level 2 spells, and then you'll have cantrips. So what a cantrip does is it doesn't eat up any of those spell
Spells.
slots. They're
It's just like
typically
free
weak
spell.
spells. Yeah. They're typically weak spells that'll do something like Mage Hand, where you can pick up an item without touching it, or like a really weak spell where you'll like do a minimal amount of damage, but it doesn't eat up any of your spell slots, so you're getting value by, and without
Yeah,
using
by
up any of
having
those.
essentially a free slot. Yeah. And so in Magic, the term was used to refer to cheap spells that replace themselves in addition to a small effect.
Yeah,
Which is
so
what
card neutral.
Yeah, they're card neutral, but they also kind of do something, which is what an article I read by Aaron Forsyth from like 2014 is where I got this definition. But yeah, it's a cheap spell that has draw card tacked onto it. So it would be something like a Chromatic Star or like a Manamorphose.
Yeah, and like card advantage spells don't really
Count.
fit into this, but it is like a made up term without like a definite hard definition. So I've heard players say certain things are cantrips and certain things aren't. Like I've heard Gush is a cantrip, but it's got like this extra advantage. But I was like, no, I don't think that's a cantrip.
I wouldn't call it a cantrip.
Yeah,
But I don't know, maybe it is. I also wouldn't have ever called Manamorphose a cantrip based on the way I understand cantrip. But then when I read this article where he described it as a cheap spell that replaces itself in addition to its other small effect, I was like, okay, that makes sense. Like Remand falls into that category. But I think that the term cantrip has kind of evolved in the Magic world to basically just meaning a 1-mana spell that says draw a card, and maybe sometimes has an additional line of text.
yeah, but it's
Because now when we say cantrip in this day and age, we're talking about preordain. We're talking about ponder. We're talking about thought scour. We're talking about opt, brainstorm. Remand doesn't come to mind. Chromatic Star doesn't come to mind. Abundant growth, we don't think about that.
yeah, but those technically are by like
Yeah.
the usual definition of cantrip. When you actually get down to like, does a cantrip need to manipulate the cards? That's where you get weird. So I think for the purpose of this podcast, we're just saying any cheap spell is a cantrip if it replaces itself card wise.
Yeah. But also for the purpose of this podcast, we're really only talking about the
Yeah.
1-mana blue ones that draw a card.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I think there's like one on this list that doesn't fit that, and that would be Faithless Looting that I really want to go into.
Oh yeah, that's a good one to talk about. I don't know. I'm really high on Manamorphose right now. Just in general, I think that I don't know. I'm really starting to subscribe to the Patrick Chapin school of thought, which is every deck should start with 4 Mishra's Bauble, 4 Street Wraiths, and if they have red or green, 4 Manamorphoses. Because like I'm playing a 48 card deck and you're playing a 60 card deck.
Yeah, but they come with costs of like your opening hand becomes really deceptive, and
Yeah,
like
you just have like a bunch of cantrips and then draw more cantrips. You don't know what the context of your hand is going to be until you start casting those spells.
yeah, and Mishra's Bauble is a slow trip, so you don't get your card until the next turn, which can be a huge drawback. And Manamorphose, it requires you to get to 2 mana. So
Yeah.
if you're stuck on 1, you don't know if you should do it, or if you're in your main phase and you want that land drop, you have to choose between, okay, I'm going to lock in this sorcery speed spell, or I'm going to, or if I wanted to cast an instant speed spell, I can't carry that mana over, and that's a cost too.
Yeah.
And then, of course, like Street Wraith, the 2 life is relevant. Gataxian Probe, the 2 life is relevant.
Yeah.
I don't subscribe to that, but you're your own
I've been
person.
playing with Manamorphose a lot more in my modern decks, and I've really been liking it. Like playing 2 Manamorphoses. Um, I don't know. It's been really good. I played a full 4 Manamorphoses in a Blue Moon deck that I had that was trying to cast Cryptic Command and Blood Moon. But that also just was because Manamorphose came with the additional text of filter mana.
Were you like playing Thing in the Ice at all?
No,
Oh,
just making it easier to cast Cryptic Commands through Blood Moons.
I guess that's something, but I wouldn't do that
That's not
myself.
really relevant to Pauper, so
Yeah, let's.
I don't think you're jamming Manamorphose in all your red-green Pauper decks.
So, I really quick want to cover all of these. I call them the can-do trips. It's the cantrips that don't sort cards really. They mostly you play them for their other ability, and the fact that they replace themselves makes them more playable. So they don't cost like any card, like they don't cost cards in your hand or cards on the field or anything, and you get that ability. Usually they're like filtering mana or something in like abundant growth or Manamorphose, Chromatic Star, like the eggs and stuff like that, Prophetic Prism. I think that those don't fit into this discussion because I really want to talk about the like card manipulation aspects, and we don't really need to talk about cards and their abilities because of course that's going to vary deck by deck. I think that Gitaxian Probe fits into this because you're using it as like spell cast, like either it puts a card in your graveyard or it triggers something, and then like Thought Scour, of course, you're putting the cards in your graveyard and you need that, and then like Portent. I don't even want to talk about Portent because one, we don't have it's not important. We don't really need like you play because you have miracles you want to play and you need to manipulate the top cards of your library first. But it doesn't really go in general decks. Like you're using it for that weird ability.
I don't know. I do think though that it's important to talk about the free information from Gitaxian Probe. Like I know that I don't think every deck makes use of it as well as some do. So you're not just jamming it in every single deck. But I think it's important to just touch on the free information of that card goes a long way in a lot of decks. So I see it a lot of time. I don't know. It's sort of a like when you think about it in the context of a deck like Tireless Tribe.
Yeah.
Like Gitaxian Probe is a really messed up Magic card. Like it replaces itself, gets you that free information, tells you exactly what you're playing around. But again, that goes back to like, what is your deck doing? And you're not just going to jam it into every single deck. And we're going to kind of touch on why we don't just jam as many of these into our decks as we can later on. But I do think it's important to just touch on Gitaxian Probe. The free information of your opponent's hand is a really powerful effect.
I think we could touch on why we don't jam that in. We could go into the cons of cantrips right away right here.
Okay. Yeah, let's just jump into the cons then. And we talk a little bit about why we're not throwing Gitaxian Probe into every single one of our decks. We're going to talk about why you don't subscribe to the Patrick Chapin rule of thought when it comes to these cantrips.
Yeah, and I think Patrick Chapin's a very, very, very smart man. Certainly smarter than me. But, one, I don't know if he was specifically talking about Pauper.
No, he was talking. He was talking obviously in the context of modern, but I think he was also just being a little hyperbolic too.
Yeah. So we also have this in the pro, but I also think it is a con. So I think it goes into both of these, that it increases your land count. Every time you're drawing a card, you're basically like every time you put a card that says draw a card in your deck, you're going to keep hitting those cards that say draw a card until you hit something that stops you. It can be a spell that you want to cast, but it can also just be a land. So for every cantrip that you put in your deck, you're basically increasing your land count, because you're going to keep drawing cards until you hit a land, and that's going to be where you stop. And so I've played decks where the goal is to just keep filling your hand and draw and draw and draw. And my experience has shown me that you do that long enough, you end up with 8 cards that are all lands in your hand, and you're just like, how did I run out of steam? I just drew 20 cards.
Yeah, I think that's sort of the problem that you're just going to encounter when you're playing with cantrips as opposed to like actual sources of card advantage. Because the card advantage, you just need one big spell to fill your hand, and then hopefully you found another big spell, right? And with the cantrips, it is just that replace. It replaces itself until it can't replace itself anymore, like you said. And so that's sort of one of the big costs of playing with cantrips in your deck, is that you lose out on a lot of tempo, right? Like, because casting it, like, even though it does replace the card and it's effectively almost free, it's not free in the fact that it costs you mana that you're not going to get back. And so if I need to cast a cantrip to try to dig and then find another cantrip, and then I cast that cantrip, and then I draw a land, and now I've just got 1 or 2 mana up as opposed to my 4. And that can also come in the sense of, like, if I cantrip and then draw a 3 mana spell, like, I can't cast that spell this turn and I stop.
I think what really, like, the way I put it in my head is every time you cast like a 1 mana cantrip, you've tacked 1 mana, albeit spread out over many turns, onto whatever you draw. So if you spend a 1 mana cantrip and draw a 3 mana card, that has costed you 4 to put on the battlefield. And this is really apparent to me because I play Mud in Legacy, and so I cast Trinisphere, and now you're tacking 3 onto every spell when you use a cantrip to find it. So instead of, 1 mana to, and then if the card is less than 3, its cost is increased as well. So it becomes super apparent that you have to pay 3 for your Ponder, find another Ponder, cast 3 for your Ponder again, you find a Delver. Now you've used 9 mana to get that Delver instead of just having the Delver. I don't like the argument that a lot of brewers use where, you should just take the cantrip out of your deck and replace it with something that actually does anything, or something, because you do want to more consistently find those great cards, which is why we do play a lot of cantrips when we can fit them into our deck.
Yeah, the cantrips effectively reduce the size of your deck. Like, yeah. I don't know that I necessarily want to say that, because they do come with that tempo cost, that they cost mana. They make your deck more condensed, I guess is how I would say it. And so they allow you to play fewer of these higher impact cards that you need, because you can use your cantrips to find them more efficiently. It also, I think, it does add that consistency to your deck too, and it allows you to play more diversity of spells. So if I'm a deck that's solely relying on my draw step, I need to play 4 of all my best spells, so I can find them as efficiently as possible. But when I have cantrips in my deck, I can start to break up the types of spells I'm playing. I can play, 2 of this removal spell and 2 of this removal spell and 1 of this removal spell. Like I could go like 2 Agony Warp, 2 Doom Blades, 1 Dismember or Disfigure. This is probably a bad example because the deck that plays those cards don't play cantrips, but that's just the example I'm using. But you can take spells that do the same thing, right? Those are all 5 removal spells, but they're more situational and they do different things in different situations. And so having cantrips lets you, okay, I can't use a Doomblade right now. He has a Gurmag Angler, so I'm gonna filter that away with my cantrip and look for something that can answer this Gurmag Angler. So it lets you play a higher number of greater diversity of spells in your deck and get those spells more consistently when you need them and get rid of them when you don't.
You know, they don't necessarily run the 1-mana cantrips, but they run Forbidden Alchemy, which functions like one, because you look at the top 4 and you choose the one, and so I think the theory is still there.
Yeah, it's a little more expensive, and it's not like a cantrip by the way we're defining it. But yeah, it's the same theory of filtering through the cards you don't need and getting specifically, those pinpoint answers that you need right now for this situation.
They can also add, with the consistency thing, late game, you can cast, like, if you top deck, like, a Preordain, yeah, it kind of would have been better to find, like, something that does something. But you can use it to find that something that does something, and hopefully you're going to avoid flooding out. So maybe you'll find 2 things that do something and still be able to cast one of those. So you've gotten this advantage in that you've avoided dead cards.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was going to say too, is you could just top deck the cards you need, or you could top deck a cantrip. You could top deck the Preordain and try to find a card that's relevant to the situation, or tuck away 2 irrelevant cards. So in a way, I don't know, it does add a lot of consistency to the deck, but these consistencies do come with a slight cost. The biggest cost is just in tempo, where, like you said, all your spells are basically an additional +1 mana tacked onto it.
It is, like, I always think about the deck building cost of cards, and when it comes to cantrips, we've talked about how it basically increases the land count in your deck, which is great because, like, you can now keep 1-landers as long as you have, like, a Ponder or a Preordain, and feel a lot better about that. But the deck building cost a lot of the time is take out a couple of lands, because it effectively does increase your land count and add that consistency. And that seems like a pretty good deck building cost to me, of removing 2 lands out of my deck.
Yeah, that is like a big a word for positive.
A pro?
Yeah. My mind just like went blank for a second, and I was just like, but yeah, one of the big pros of the deck is the fact that when you're deck building, I like to take my deck, my 60 card deck, and I like to subtract the number of cantrips I have from my deck, and then use that number to determine how many lands I want to play. So if I have 12 cantrips in my deck, I look at my 48 cards and say, how many lands would I play in a 48 card deck? And typically the answer is between 18 and 20.
I've heard a hard, like, if you want a hard and fast rule, I've heard both cantrips and mana dorks count as half of a land, and typically you want to be running a third of your deck in land, and then you can reduce that by half of that number. Yeah. That doesn't automatically work, but it's a good guiding.
If you think about my rule, and I have 12 cantrips, and if they're each worth half a land, that's 6 land. So I want to play 18 lands.
Yeah, and that works out perfect.
24 mana sources, and that seems like a good number, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Boom. But again, the problem with that we're faced, though, is that does sometimes also come down to deck constraints. Maybe you're playing a couple Ponders in your deck, but you still want to have more lands, and you're still playing like 21, 22 lands. I don't know.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's kind of a chicken or the egg thing of what cantrips you play based on what kind of mana base you want to run. Like
Yeah,
preordained.
Build your mana base based on your cantrips, or you determine your cantrips based on what your mana base wants to look like?
Yeah, and that's a very difficult question to answer, and I don't have the answer for it.
It probably just varies by
Deck to deck.
Yeah.
Like something like a Tireless Tribe, where they want to be digging deeper, faster, that wants to run something like Ponder. And we'll get into Ponder versus Preordained in a minute. But they're going to have to run more shuffle effects. And then they kind of run with a different cantrip package because of that. But then it gets very complicated. So one of the last pros that I want to cover is just that, of course, playing cantrips fills up your graveyard. I think that kind of falls into the can-do trip role a little bit, but they do it passively, and so you don't have to be playing something like Thought Scour Mental Note to fill up your graveyard. They'll just add value themselves like they should be, and then they get this extra tacked on thing of like, it's an extra card for Delve, or Circular Logic. It'll count towards the number of cards in your graveyard, as well as like Augur of Bolas. It counts as another spell in your deck, and it kind of passively increases the number of spells in your deck. So these are a lot of reasons we want to be running cantrips. Like the negatives really don't amount to much compared to the positives, because they're just fantastic, and the sooner you realize that, the sooner you're going to improve at Magic. Even though I don't play a whole lot of them, I think it's kind of, when I brew, your brew ends up looking like some of the best decks, because the best cards synergize with cantrips. So I just end up like, well, now I'm basically playing Delver. What am I even doing? This isn't a brew anymore. I might as well play that other deck. Anyway, let's get into some of the specifics with the card manipulation, the ones we actually want to talk about.
Yeah, so let's go into some of the specific cantrips. We're gonna focus mostly on the ones that get played in Paupers. We're not gonna talk about like Serum Visions or Sleight of Hand,
Opt.
or Opt. Yeah, we're gonna talk about the good ones, the ones that get played in Pauper. So the first one that we're gonna try to talk about in a timely manner is Brainstorm.
This could have its own podcast.
Yeah.
Not even episode. Podcast.
Yeah. Like, there's been a book written about Gush. We could write an encyclopedia on Brainstorm.
I think
not
so.
Not we.
No, not us.
But, like, someone could who's smart.
So we wanted to talk about casting Brainstorm in Pauper versus casting Brainstorm in Legacy, because this is a format where we can cast Brainstorm, and it's really widely regarded as pretty much the most powerful cantrip in Legacy, that is.
Yeah. Well, I think in general, but it sees a lot less play in Pauper despite its power level. And I think that's because its power level comes from synergies that it creates. And when a deck can't utilize those synergies as efficiently, Brainstorm loses on power level.
One of those, pretty much the main synergy it has is shuffle effects, or cards that remove the top cards of your library and put them elsewhere. So that's the big reason why people don't just jam 4 Brainstorms in all their blue decks in Pauper, as opposed to Legacy, where they do that. Our shuffle effects have much higher costs. If you have a Terramorphic Expanse, one, you've had to put a Terramorphic Expanse in your deck, and that's a tap land. It, of course, helps you find your other color, but you can't just hold on to Terramorphic in the same way that you can hold on to a fetch land in Legacy.
Yeah, there's a much bigger tempo cost from being able to do that, which is why Brainstorm sees so much less play than cantrips like Ponder or Preordain. I think the other big thing, a big difference between the two formats is in Pauper, decks that want to make use of Brainstorm are much more proactive decks. Decks that know exactly what they're looking for. Because there's always a different dynamic when you're casting Brainstorm in a deck that is proactive versus a deck that's reactive, which is what most Legacy Brainstorm decks are, I think. When you're reactive, Brainstorm is like the last spell you ever want to cast. You basically just want to hold your Brainstorm forever and ever and ever and wait until your opponent does something, and then you know exactly what you're brainstorming for. Whereas in proactive decks, decks that are more linear, they just know what they're looking for all the time. They know what they need to do, and you're basically just brainstorming to generate this huge amount of velocity and just start seeing as many cards as you possibly can.
I've heard people say this about Legacy of the best Brainstorm is one that you never cast. And I don't think that's true of Pauper, because that would mean you're always trying to do something else or set up or get in a position where you can actually get this Brainstorm to work, because it takes effort. In Legacy, you just want to hold on to it, and eventually, like, oh, I might need a Force of Will, and I have 1 mana, I'll just draw the top 3 and maybe it'll be in there. Oh, look, it was free Force of Will. In Pauper, you have to set that up beforehand in either lining up a shuffle effect, or you hope that you're going to draw the shuffle effect because you really need this other card. But then it takes up that mana that you are going to be wanting to use on your counterspells or get in that counterspell fight. And none of our other spells really shuffle that easily. People have been trying for years to make a competitive Cobblade deck because Squadron Hawk synergizes so well with Brainstorm. Let's make a deck that uses Brainstorm. That's a lot worse than, like, just having a Stoneforge Mystic or something. And, you know, our number of shuffles are so much less. In Legacy, you can play 9 fetch lands and not really blink an eye. If you play 4 Terramorphics and 1 to 3 Ash Barrens, you've slowed yourself down significantly. And if you're a tempo deck, that doesn't fly. So you usually see 1 to 3 Brainstorms in your lists. There are exceptions, you know, of course, like Tribe, I'm not sure exactly what they run, but it's 3 to 4 because they're looking for something specific. They're looking for Tireless Tribe and Inside Out.
So another difference between Brainstorm and Pauper and Legacy that I think is also important to note is in Legacy, being able to hide your important cards is really important because there are a lot of Thoughtseize effects, and there's Cabal Therapy and the like. And those don't really exist as much in Pauper. Like, you'll see Duress maybe from time to time out of sideboards, but it's not relevant enough that that's something that's in, like, the front of my mind with my Brainstorm is that I could Brainstorm here, but what if they Duress me? That's not usually something I think about when I'm casting my Brainstorms.
Or building your deck, you're not just like, oh, I got to play around that Duress. It would be nice if I could tuck this card.
Yeah,
No.
so at the same, you're not prioritizing Brainstorm either over other cantrips because you need to be able to do those types of things. So you can afford to play less Brainstorms, which means that you're not trying to create more ways to make Brainstorm better, which in terms costs tempo and card slots and all these things that we've been talking about. The last thing that I do want to touch on with Brainstorm, though, is getting Brainstorm locked.
Yeah.
I think that we as Magic players, when it comes to casting Brainstorm, because we're so used to seeing it in Legacy, we think about getting locked as something that's a lot worse than in most cases it actually is. Like when I think of being Brainstorm locked, it's like I kept a 1-land hand with a Brainstorm, and I need my Brainstorm to find my second land drop, and then you don't find your land drop, and you're locked for the next 3 turns. But like in most scenarios, though, when you cast Brainstorm, it's like I paid 1 mana to filter my draw, get an extra card deep in my deck, and then I set up my next 2 draws. And that's like, obviously that's not as good as the scenario where you're just like, I have an overabundance of dead cards in my hand. Take those, put them on top, shuffle them away. But even in the scenarios where you just cast Brainstorm as a cantrip with no way to shuffle your deck, as long as you have a good number of, like, you're not mana screwed or anything, you're not looking for mana, you're just looking for cards, you're looking for, like, I need something to do this turn. Brainstorm. Oh, I found a Spellstutter Sprite. Cool. I'll hold up the rest of my mana for Spellstutter Sprite. Let's put this Gush there, and then let's put this Preordain there. And you're not really locked. Like, so, you've just set up your next couple of turns.
Yeah, and I think you got it perfect when it's getting Brainstorm locked early is terrible, but then don't be afraid so much of being Brainstorm locked later, because it sucks when you're Brainstorm locked and all you have is lands and it's just lands for days. But I think it's worth the risk of just playing the Brainstorm, because you might draw that, like, any of your other cantrips or a shuffle effect.
Yeah, in that scenario, though, like, you're drawing those lands anyway. Brainstorm or no, if you're just going to flood out, you're going to flood out. And the Brainstorm didn't change that. But the Brainstorm could help you get through that more efficiently. Like, if, the third card is, a Gush, and it's like I drew land, and now I've got 3 lands in my hand, but that other land was a Gush. That Gush is going to help you get through. But, like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a weight between, well, it's a decision between patience or not, because that if you're going to get Brainstorm locked, maybe people are waiting the extra turn so that they've seen 4 cards deep before they limit themselves by getting locked like that. So,
well, yeah, and I think that you don't, even though we're not holding in Pauper, you don't want to hold your Brainstorms like you do in Legacy. Like you said, the saying of Brainstorm, the best Brainstorm is the one you never cast, that does not apply to Pauper. You do want to choose your spots carefully with Brainstorm. I don't know that it's very often correct to Brainstorm on turn 1, like in the dark. But I think that even in Pauper, the best way to Brainstorm is with a purpose. So in the scenario I described, my purpose was, I've got 3 mana. Let's try to find something that I can do for 2 mana. And use your Brainstorm to dig, whether that's, a Ninja the Deep Hours that I'm going to ninjutsu in, or a counterspell, or a Spellstutter Sprite, or whatever. Or maybe it's just another cantrip and another 1 mana creature or something. But have a purpose behind your Brainstorms. Don't just like, I've got mana, I'm going to cast my Brainstorm.
So, like, the one I have the hardest time with is, my purpose is finding the extra land. Like, I want to make my land drop so I don't fall too far behind. but I have to choose between casting my Brainstorm or holding up Counterspell. I don't want to just fall so far behind by casting Brainstorm and then either finding that tap land or getting locked or something.
Yeah.
Dream case, I find an island and Brainstorm was effectively free, but I think you're right that you basically want to go for it the majority of the time, because if you hold up Counterspell and you end up counterspelling, you're still falling behind because you didn't make that land drop. Almost always you're going to have a way to catch up. So I would just say go for it and don't fear being locked as much as people talk about it.
Yeah. It's less of a thing in this format. I don't know. It's like when players in I'm going to use Modern as an example because I'm playing a ton of Modern lately, but people are like, I need to play way more fetch lands in my deck because of Jace. I'm like, you don't necessarily need to. Play the requisite number of fetch lands, but it makes Brainstorm better. No, Brainstorm just is good. You're brainstorming every turn. It's just okay. You're fine. I think that we are in a spoiled mindset, of our Brainstorm isn't good unless it's Brainstorm plus fetch land, and that's not always true. Brainstorm is just a powerful spell on its own, but it comes with the cost of choosing your spot. You can't just cast your Brainstorms all the time because it can put you into trouble. You need to really pick your spots where you brainstorm. And in the example you're describing, it's like, well, I'm going into my turn 3. I have 2 mana and I don't have my 3rd land drop. Should I brainstorm here to try and hit my 3rd land drop, or should I hold up my counterspell? And I think that often the answer is just brainstorm. Brainstorm now, try to find your land, try to set up your next few turns. You can catch up because of the efficiency of your spells over the course of the next couple turns. But sometimes the answer's wrong. I think that if I'm on the draw, or if I'm on the play versus in the mirror, and it's game 2, and I have 2 mana and a counterspell, I would not brainstorm to make my land drop.
Why?
Because the Geist, Stormbound Geist, is so critical in that matchup. I want to make sure I always have Counterspell Magic open when my opponent can cast Stormbound Geist. And that's the beauty of the Brainstorm, though, is the Brainstorm's an instant. And so if they don't cast the Geist, I can Brainstorm on their end step and try to find land drops. And then I can untap, make my land drop, try to cast another cantrip, keep setting up, still have my Counterspell open for their Stormbound Geist, whatever.
I think that really gets down to it of you only need to hold up that counterspell for the very high impact cards. And if it's not super, super high impact, let them have it. Cast your Brainstorm so you don't fall behind.
Mm-hmm. And then just use the efficiency of your spells to get ahead. And unless that card is just so critical to the matchup, you're probably usually fine going, I can let him resolve a spell. And I can use these early turns to set myself up. I can lose a little bit of this tempo to set myself up so that I can pull ahead in the late game. And where that is incorrect is where you're in a position that they can cast one of those spells that pull the game away from you, that I can't get ahead of. I can't brainstorm now and then worry about Stormbound Geist later. I need to counter Stormbound Geist now. I need to just keep that off the board. So I'm not going to brainstorm here in case he has it because the risk reward is too high.
So the same thing would go if you're playing against Tireless Tribe, even game 1, are you just saying that card's probably just so important that you would just keep up the counterspell as well? And then
yeah, so and especially against a deck like Tireless Tribe where I'm less concerned about trying to get ahead. All I really need to do is keep Tireless Tribe off the table, and then I can pull ahead. And so yeah, if I was in that scenario against Tireless Tribe, and I somehow knew they were Tireless Tribe game 1.
Yeah, Basically, you see island planes.
Yeah. Yeah, island planes, something else, whatever. Yeah, I would do the same thing. I would lose making my third land drop to be able to counter it, and then I would just brainstorm in their end step. Or I would, yeah, I would brainstorm in my end step there, and then try to find my third land there, play my third land, hopefully have another spell to cast, and then still be able to hold up my counter magic. So I do think it varies by matchup, and then obviously it varies by. It's just so hard because we can think of a million different scenarios.
Yeah.
Where is it correct to brainstorm here? Is it not correct to brainstorm here?
So
we should stop talking about brainstorm. It's just too much.
okay, yeah, we should move on.
So much information. Should we talk about some other cantrips? Some of the other modern or pauper cantrips. So we've got Ponder and Preordain. So this is actually an interesting, fun fact. Alex Ullman, I think his name is.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote an article sort of about the state of Pauper. And in his article, he had the numbers on the most played cards in the format. And Preordain was number 1.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, I mean, it for someone who, so for me, I don't play as much Pauper as I have other formats. I've played a lot more Legacy in my life. I've played a lot more Modern in my lifetime. And Pauper is still sort of new to me. I've really only been playing Pauper consistently for about a year. And so in my head, I'm always just thinking like, well, obviously Ponder is better than Preordain. But why is it in Pauper that Preordain seems to be the more popular choice?
Well, I think first off, Ponder is more popular in Legacy because, of course, it digs deeper, and the drawback of being locked into having those cards, you're not so much locked because of those shuffle effects again. And Preordain sees the most play because it doesn't need anything else to make it good. It's probably the best cantrip on its own. So if you have a deck that's splashing blue or isn't super in on like having to find a specific card, you just want to find good cards, Preordain is the choice. Okay.
Because, I mean, they do both see the same amount of cards. Like, I guess if you look at 3 cards and then shuffle with Ponder, you technically see 1 more card, but like they do really just see 3 cards, and so Preordain does sort of a better job of filtering out the bad cards and the good cards so that you don't ever get stuck in a scenario where I really need this 1 card, but then I pretty much die if I keep these other 2 cards, or like these other 2 cards are going to be really bad for me. And you just don't create that scenario with Preordain.
Yeah, I think where Pauper, the power level's pretty flat. It's just like any card that is action is what I'm looking for. Preordain ends up being better, and then like the decks that use Ponder are ones that are looking for something specific or already have the other cantrips in their deck. And I think that's the biggest difference. Like if you look at Tireless Tribe, they have 4 Brainstorm, 4 Ponders, and then they end up playing a lesser amount of Preordain because they're looking for that specific card. But that's like a very specific scenario. If you're playing like a control deck, a tempo deck, or just a deck splashing blue, you put in Preordain. And that's what happens with the majority of the decks we have.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I hadn't really ever taken the time to really think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Why would Preordain see more play in a lot of these decks? Because if you look at it, I mean, Delver just plays the full Ponders and Preordains, and then you go look at these other non-blue decks, but like Marasa Tron, they're not playing Ponder, they're playing Preordain, And I think I think you kind of hit it on the head with what you said.
Is Tron playing Preordain?
Well, when they do play a cantrip, you do
Oh,
preordain, right?
yeah. And that deck does have more shuffle effects, I think, than an average deck. Like with maybe not, because it doesn't have like the. So yeah, I take that back. I was gonna say since it has Expedition Map in addition to other things, but it doesn't have Evolving Wilds or anything like that. So it does have a low amount of shuffles, which again would make you want to play Ponder.
Anything else we want to? I don't know.
I think the contrast between these two is like they're pretty similar. It's they are great because they do all the like they're good like standalone cards, but I think Preordained is the better standalone. Like you don't have to put in the amount of effort, like near the amount of effort like Brainstorm to hit that ceiling.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's pretty much all I have on those.
So is the floor pretty low on Preordain?
The floor is high.
The floor's well, so that means it's bad, right?
No, it means it's good.
But you got to climb up to that floor.
No, you have to. You're automatically at the floor. You start on the floor. You don't start in the basement.
What if you're from under the floorboards?
Then you're in the basement or the crawl space.
Crawl space. Okay.
Do
we have any other cantrippy cards that we want to chat about?
I do have one last thought. I think in Pauper, the automatic hierarchy of cantrips goes Preordain, then Ponder, then Brainstorm, which is actually the reverse of Legacy, which I find interesting, and I want to point at the shuffle effects. I just keep pointing at the shuffle effects because that's really all it is. So the next one I wanted to just briefly touch on, and this again would fit into the cantrips with abilities. What's it called? Grouping. Yeah. In my mind, it's Faithless Looting and Careful Study, because
they're interesting though, because I don't know if I consider them cantrips.
I think
because we define a cantrip as a card that replaces itself, and these two cards are net negative when it comes to cards. You're down a card when you cast both, right?
Yeah, I think by the strict definition, or the definition we started with, they're not cantrips, but they're like one mana manipulation. So like to be a cantrip where they replace themselves, you do have to work a little bit in playing like a madness creature or madness spell, or having something that you can do out of the graveyard to get them to be card neutral.
Yeah.
Which I would actually say that's the reason why you don't almost ever see these unless you're playing specifically that, and then even then a lot of the time they bite you. So I would say stay away for the most part. I haven't had much success other than in like specifically a madness deck. Like
like reanimator decks or something. Like if you have a specific way to get value out of cards in your graveyard, I think that these cards are fantastic.
And I've actually spoken to people who are like, yeah, they're cantrips, and when I tell them, well, they're card disadvantage, so I don't know if I would want to play that in my deck that wants to 1-for-1 or grind, and they're like, what? How's it card disadvantage? And I'm just like, are you
stuff, and then you discard 2 cards.
Exactly.
So you're down a card. You're only filtering your cards. You're paying 1 mana to filter through 2 cards, you're not replacing itself. So I think it falls just outside the realm of what we can consider a cantrip.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that these cards have very practical uses in the format. If you can take advantage of the graveyard or the discarding to get madness or, whatever.
You are playing a worse card trying to game it so that you get an advantage out of it, though. And even when you discard something and you like madness it, now you're just card neutral. And I think that to work anything past that, where Ponder Preordain you kind of like it's guaranteed a card, and then any value of getting rid of cards that you don't want is actually value.
Yeah. So
like,
what
you're
you
not
need,
even there.
what you need to be doing to abuse this card needs to be more powerful than just, you know, card neutral. Like you said, if you cast Faithless Looting and then Madness a card, you're paying 1 mana plus the cost of your Madness. So I don't know, let's say 3 mana to go just to get net neutral. I mean, you still get the body in play or the advantage of whatever the Madness card is, which is a benefit, but I don't know. I think you need to do it. It needs to be really powerful. Like, I think that if you careful study and you throw away Dragon Breath and Ulamog's Crusher, is that what the card is?
Yeah.
Yeah, Ulamog's Crusher, and then you can reanimate it the next turn. That is a very powerful effect, and that's worth, the card disadvantage of playing these cards in your deck. So I think they reward very high synergy with high payoff, right?
Yeah, if you think about it, the second half of Faithless Looting actually is a cantrip.
Yeah.
So
yeah, you do get the value out of it when you cast it from your graveyard. The biggest downside to either of these two cards are, like, obviously if you top deck it and have no cards in hand.
Mm-hmm.
So because you don't get any value out of it at all, except to, I don't know, put it in your graveyard if it's a Faithless Looting, maybe. Or maybe you have cards with flashback and you don't mind it. But for the most part, if you top deck it and you have no cards in hand, you almost just can't cast it.
Yeah, that's 100% correct. So
I don't know. If you have them in your deck, you should probably be cognizant of that and, like, not play extra lands when you don't need to. Just hold a land in your hand in case you draw Faithless Looting.
Mm-hmm.
But
so then, lastly, I have this little suite of, I want to say, hateable cards that have a potential for actual card advantage. And they are Accumulated Knowledge, Think Twice, and Forbidden Alchemy. All of these are instant speed, which is super great for any cantrip. That's something that you're always looking for, but you're going to pay extra for it. And then they all use the graveyard, so they're hateable in that advantage aspect. Otherwise, Accumulated Knowledge and Think Twice are just going to be a card that replaces themselves, that uses more mana than usual, but at least it's an instant speed. I really love accumulated knowledge. The upside on that card is just, it's so, the ceiling is so high.
what about the floor?
I want to say it's pretty low. Like, I know you're just saying that ironically, but like paying 2 mana.
You know that I still don't understand it.
Like, paying 2 mana to just replace a card in your hand, even at instant speed when you're not going to use that mana, that ends up being pretty bad if you don't actually end up doing something. Like, that could have been an action spell or something. I would say that they're still great if you can afford them, and if you're a slower deck. Like, if you have time to do something like this.
I think they're really, really good in decks that have counterspell.
Yeah.
You can, or other 2 mana interaction spells. So you can hold up mana on your opponent's turn, use your counterspell, use your Doomblade, and if they don't do anything you care about, cast your Think Twice, cast your Accumulated Knowledge. Take advantage of the fact that you're not using your mana otherwise. Because that's one way for those decks to get ahead of you, is if you're not using your mana efficiently, and they are using their mana efficiently. So,
and just the fact that they cost 2 mana puts them in a really bad spot as far as, like, if you're at 1 mana and you're deciding whether to keep a hand or not, this was a Ponder or a Preordain, they would actually affect your decision. And these, it's like, oh, this hand's going to be really slow, and I'm not going to be able to cantrip until I hit 2. And so I'd say use discretion.
all right, well, I don't really have much else to talk about for all these cantrips. So, if you're ready to move on, let's wrap up the main topic and move into our Pop Challenge breakdown.
Yeah.
Boom! Challenge time. Breakdown time.
Do you want me to just run down this list?
Breakdown time. Talk about the top 8 decks. What are they all?
Okay.
They're the decks.
So in our number 1 and number 2 spot, we have Tireless Tribe. Number 3, we have Boros Monarch. Number 4, we have Freed from the Real combo. Number 5, we have Mono Blue Delver. Number 6, Stompy. Number 7, Mono Blue Delver. And number 8, Blue Red Pieces. So there's no Scred Delver in the top 8. So I feel like we have shown that we can adjust to beat that deck. So that's a good sign.
Yeah, and it's not even just like this week. You know, last week I feel like there weren't that many, or maybe there were.
No, yeah. I think you're right.
There only one. I feel like we've been seeing like a slow downtrend.
Yeah.
Of Scred Delver. And today there's just 0. And I don't know, there's a bunch of Tireless Tribe, and I don't know if that has anything to do with Luis's video on Channel Fireball, where he just raffle stomped people with Tireless Tribe. And
that was so funny to watch. Like, just watching him, like, oh, that was a mistake, not even punished. Like, it made me so mad watching that.
Well, it's funny because, one, Luis does seem to get extremely lucky on his streams, but 2, I think that his play overall is so tight that when he does make a mistake, he doesn't get as punished as hard for it because everything else he has done up to that point has been so good, so, perfect.
Yeah, it was posted on the 27th, so maybe that did have an impact, but I know that Tireless Tribe is just a very good deck that has been posting numbers consistently. It is an Augur of Bolas deck, and I've seen people point to that card and say, maybe we need to ban this, but I think at this point, I'm off of bans. I don't think we really need to ban anything. Let's just give...
Augur of Bolas might have been the number 1 card on that list that I was talking about.
I think it was.
Preordain was the top cantrip that I remember. But I think Augur actually was the number 1 card now that you talk about him.
Yeah, he was, like, I think he did point to that and cite, like, it really stops aggro in its tracks for just 2 mana. Yeah.
And it gives so much staying power to the blue decks that are playing it. They just filter through their deck and find whatever spells they need, gum up the ground, not under any pressure, and they just have all the time in the world to do their stuff.
Yeah, that card just... its synergies with cantrips are amazing. Like, you can go find a cantrip that'll hide what card you actually found, because like one of the downsides is that you have to reveal it, and you can set up what you're gonna grab, as well as, like, if you have a brainstorm, you can brainstorm, either put a sorcery or instant on top, or you can just throw 2 lands there and just say that you don't even care.
Yeah, try to look for the 3rd card.
Yeah, look at the 3rd card. If it's not, oh well, you just shuffled 3 cards you don't want to the bottom. Not shuffled, you put them on the bottom.
Yeah. Arguably even better than shuffling, because you're never going to draw them again. I mean, until you
shuffle.
Like Ash Barrens and shuffle.
But other than that, what's notable is that Freed from the Real is in this list.
This is a weirdo deck.
Yeah, it's...
I don't know, I'm not very familiar with it, but it's just interesting. It does a lot of silly things.
Yeah, we did talk about it like a week ago with the...
I think the last episode, it was our card of the week.
Yeah, freed from the real. This is the version that's animating the land. And so it's just running a whole bunch of enchant lands that...
Wind's End Con. I think that's the only animated land it has. It's just 3 copies of Wind's End Con.
It is playing a Lifespark Spellbomb.
What?
Yeah, the Lifespark Spellbomb.
Oh, there it is.
It makes your land a 3/3 for 1 green. And then it just has this... It has the Arbor Elf. It plays Arbor Elf so that it can just untap its land and just make a ton of mana.
Gift of Paradise, Fertile Ground, Abundant Growth. Abundant Growth doesn't actually net mana, it just filters your mana.
Right.
And it's a cantrip.
Yeah. Right. It's also playing Train of Thought. That's the...
Train of Thought a lot.
It's playing 4 Train of Thought. I've never seen 4 in this list. I've seen 2.
I've not seen very many lists, so I don't know, but 4 Train of Thought seems like a lot.
Yeah, it's usually 1, and then they have 4 of the Lifespark Spellbomb. So they're cutting Lifesparks just to have a better draw engine. This is a really interesting list. Trinket Mage just to find the 1 Spellbomb. Huh.
And then it uses Drift of Phantasms to transmute for... It can transmute for Freed from the Will, or it's one of Gift of Paradise, or it can go pick up the Capsize. So it can kind of just grab whatever piece of your combo you're missing.
And I would like to highlight that it's playing one of the cantrips we listed today, and that's Preordain. And that would just be because I would think that this might actually consider running Ponder, because a lot of the time it's just looking for a specific card to do its combo, but it's going with the Preordain, and it must be thinking that it doesn't have really any shuffle effects in the mana base, and if it can just find something, it can usually just, like, there's so many tutor abilities that it'll just find one of those, and that's fine enough.
Oh, I didn't notice the Dizzy spell also has Transmute.
Yeah, that card would be confusing in the list if it didn't have Transmute. You're like...
Yeah, I kind of just like skimmed over it when I was looking through, and then I came back to it to read what it actually did, and I was like, -3, -0.
It's kind of funny.
I kill... the thing.
What?
No, never mind.
It would kill Tireless Tribe.
It does?
As long as they have switched the power and toughness.
Yeah, because once they switch the power and toughness, because of layers, it still subtracts. It subtracts it from the toughness, but that's actually its power. But I was going to ask, so what is Tireless Tribe? Is an 0/4?
It is a 1/1.
It's a 1/1. Okay, so yeah, I guess that's what I was going to ask. I couldn't remember if it ever got toughness buffs, but yeah, Dizzy spell kills Tireless Tribe.
And I don't mind that Tireless Tribe is a strong deck, because it's actually pretty easy to hate out if you're gaming specifically against it.
Yeah, and it's inconsistent. Like it like any combo deck, it just loses to itself amount of the time.
Yeah.
Which, it makes me think that combo decks like that are fine in the format. It's when they become like incredibly consistent, like the I don't know, like the most consistent combo deck I can think of is the Amulet Titan deck from Modern a few years ago. Like that deck was just incredibly consistent in how it could win. And if it's not, I think that combo decks are fine. They're easy to hate out. You just need to know how to play against them, and I think if you just know how to play against Tireless Tribe, know when to interact with the what they're doing.
It is actually kind of hard to interact with a lot of the time, because like usually my strategy because I have no better strategy, is like throw burn spells one at a time at their tireless tribe and keep their hand size low. But thanks to Gush, they can just boom reload. Like Gush alone has them one card off from just
and see that's
killing you.
why I think you just need to know when to pick your spot. You know, you need to try, instead of throwing burn spells at their tribe, trying to keep their hand size low. I think you need to try and assemble a hand, sculpt a hand that will kill them on the combo turn. After they've inside outed and they've made the tireless tribes vulnerable by giving it just the one toughness, you know, you need to have whatever you need to have, like, I don't know, a burn spell or two and a counter spell or something, like a dispel up. You just, I don't know.
Well, that's if you're specifically playing Skred Delver. Sure, you can do that. Yeah. But, like, if you're playing red-green, red-white, black whatever, or just mono-black, there's a lot of times where they play it, they protect it, they untap, they can keep protecting it, and have enough cards to go off. That's usually...
I think that's what makes the deck good.
Well, yeah.
It's hard for these non-blue decks to interact with it.
Yeah, I think if we ever get to the point where it becomes dominant, we can knock it down, but if you're not gaming against it, I know that it is hard.
Oh, well, that was a good talk about Tireless Tribe while we were covering the Freed from the Real deck. Should we move on?
Yeah, I think we did cover Freed from the Real, and then we just went back.
We got on a tangent, but we did kind of talk about it. So 5th place was Blue Delver. Just blue, no red.
Yep.
No spread.
I think we've covered that into the ground.
Yeah. Couple dazes. This one's 3 Spire Golems in the main deck, which is normal-ish.
Mm-hmm.
2 and 3 are normal. 4 Mutagenic Growths, which is becoming the norm.
Yeah.
Nothing really exciting in the sideboard, I don't really think. That's out of the ordinary.
Yeah, I think it's pretty normal. It's just, sure, they got 4 gut shots. That'll help them with Tribe, but yeah, I have nothing much to say.
Okay. 6th place is Monogreen Stompy. Is River Boa common? I don't know that I've seen this very often.
Yeah.
It is?
Yeah. It has come and gone a little bit, but I think we're back on the uptick for River Boa. I've seen more and more of them in the lists that I've seen running around. Just, you know, there's plenty of islands, and then if you're playing against red, that
regenerates. So
yeah,
it's really good.
And then it's just I think the same sideboard package of just like basically the green removal you have access to with Epic Confrontation and Scattershot Archer.
Yep.
That beats out the top 2 decks in the format, or that helps against them.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Version Longbow is just insane against a lot of decks.
Yeah.
And Gleeful Sabotage is sort of just obvious. I really love the mono green sideboard for Stompy just because it's so simple.
Yeah.
You know, there's no wasted mental energy between games where you're trying, like, how do I sideboard? Well, he's got this weird card, so maybe I sideboard differently than I normally would. It's just, nope, this matchup I'll bring in my Epic Confrontations, and, you know, just easy, boom.
It's not a huge list of 1 of and 2 ofs. It's just like, oh, I really want these cards most of the time. Let's just have lots of those.
They just go into every matchup knowing exactly what combination of 4 cards they're bringing in. And I really like that about a deck, when the sideboarding plan is just very straightforward. And you're not trying to, like, get fancy and next level people. It's just very, this is my game plan in game 1. And then depending on the matchup, this is my game plan in game 2. And I sideboard in these 4 to 6 cards, and I take out these 4 to 6 cards, whatever.
Yeah, 7th place, pretty much the same. I mean, it's got the 1 mutagenic. It's really just picking nits of.
They're playing
these are just slightly different.
And 2 extra vapor snags, as opposed to a full 4 mutagenic growths. I think that's the only difference. 2 snaps.
And then in 8th place, We have another Augur of Bolas deck in the blue-red pieces deck, the Flurry of Horns.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's only running 2 Flurry of Horns, which is kind of a little bit notable, but other than that, we're just, 4 accumulated knowledge, main deck Electrickery is a one of. It is running Into the Royal, which I haven't seen.
There's nothing fancy here with Flurry of the Horns, right? It's just 5 mana, make 2/2/3s.
With haste.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's basically a spell that gets you 2 threats that are substantial that you can find off of pieces of the puzzle and Augur of Bolas. That's basically it.
Yeah. I don't know. I've never played this deck. I've never really seen this deck get played. Flurry of the Horns just seems like a bad card to me.
Yeah.
Am I just gravely underestimating 2/2/3s?
I think you are.
Okay.
It's a
All right,
2-for-1 most of the time.
Oh, yeah, I guess so. I guess that's true. And 3 toughness is really big.
The haste is super relevant.
I don't know. It just seems like a really weird win condition to me. Not very. I don't know. It's not. I don't know. It's not big and flashy, and maybe that's my problem.
But if you think about the top few decks, they're not. It is a 2-for-1. They have to have 2 removal spells when you cast that, and if you have any amount of counter magic, and you can just keep one alive, you'll just end up beating in with that constantly. Them being 2/3s means that they can attack through most boards where they have 2 toughness creatures, 3 toughness creatures,
which is most boards.
Yeah, they haven't.
Very rarely is there something that you can attack into.
Really, you want to play around Augur of Bolas as much as you can right now. I think it's one of the top cards that you're if you're brewing, you have to have a plan for getting through a 1/3, and it's just well, I just made 2 guys. One of them's going to get through, and the other one's going to live.
Okay. All right. I can see it. I don't know. I don't know.
It does feel weird. It feels weird.
It just on its face, I'm looking at it, and it's just 5 mana, make 2/2/3s, and I'm thinking that that's a fine card in limited. I don't know if I first pick it. I'm trying to remember what Born of the Gods limited was like. Maybe this was first pickable, but I don't know. It just doesn't seem flashy. Maybe that's my problem. I want the win condition to be big and fancy and extravagant.
But other than this, most decks that kind of have this same feel of blue, red, whatever, it's I'm gonna win with Muldrifter.
Yeah, Muldrifter is big and flashy. Draws you 2 cards.
Yeah.
I don't know, but these other decks that are, I want to win with Muldrifter, but they've got other stuff, right? This deck literally just has Augur of Bolas and Flurry of Horns.
And 1,000 burn spells. Okay, maybe it just has Firebolt and Lightning Bolt. That's 20.
It just has Firebolt and Lightning Bolt.
Just Firebolt.
Pyre, though.
What is it?
Harvest Pyre.
Yeah, that card's super good. With just Lightning Bolt, that's 12 damage, and then Firebolt, that's 16. So I do like adding up. Huh?
Each firebolt is worth 4.
Yeah, and there's 4 of them. That's 16.
Oh, I thought you were adding the firebolts to the lightning bolts.
No.
I was like, your math's off, bro.
Nah. I do actually like looking at decks a lot of the time and just adding up the total number of points of burn that they can do over an entire game. And if it's high enough that I just feel that's in my head, that's their reach score. I don't know if it's useful at all, but it just makes me kind of gauge how much I have to respect them or value my life total, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. It's I guess it is if you on turn 5 they make Flurry of the Horns and your choice is to chump block or take 4 you do have to think about, well, what if they just have 2 lightning bolts? Or what if they just start flashing back fire bolts?
Mm-hmm.
I guess that is something. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I just need to play with the deck and see how it plays out, and I'm just really struggling to see how Flurry of the Horns is great.
All right, so I think that finishes up our Pauper Challenge breakdown.
Yeah, that's all the decks. We broke it down. That was the show. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you found something insightful that we said. I think our talk was actually quite insightful, at least for me. I feel like I learned a lot.
Same. I wouldn't say I'm an expert on casting cantrips. I had to do a lot of research for this, and I honestly just asked you a lot of questions, I felt like.
You probably could have just stopped that sentence on, I'm not an expert. Got him. Woo!
I'm going to beat you in a game of Magic after this.
You will. I'll misclick and you'll win.
Yeah.
I say that like you only win because I misclick. That was like the one game that I was going to win. I'm like, I'm actually going to beat Sean at Pauper, and then I misclick. Oh my gosh. Anyway, shout out quick to our sponsor, puremtgo.com. Check them out because they're awesome. If you want to email the show, get in contact with us, ask questions, tell us your feelings about the podcast, feedback, you can do so at commonknowledgemtg@gmail.com. And if you also want to support the show, you can do so on patreon.com/commonknowledge. Me and Sean are starting to think about and talk about, I guess, incentives or rewards.
Yeah, reward levels.
Yeah, reward levels, things that we want to do to start giving back to you guys for supporting the show. And just to show our appreciation, do more fun things for you guys, and try to start building a community of common knowledgers.
Mm-hmm.
So, other than that, if you guys want to get in contact with us, you can do so via Twitter at CKPodcastMTG. You can get a hold of me on Twitter at bclark_CK. And Sean, where do we find you?
I'm also on Twitter. I am at Lobbert8. That's Lobbert, number 8. And my YouTube, I am just Lobbert. I'm working on a video right now of, it's kind of going to be a two-parter where I play one version of the deck that is 2 colors and one version of the deck is 3 colors, and I kind of compare and see if I can improve the deck or get any conclusions. So tune in for that.
Do it. Tune in. Do it now.
Goodbye.